So these are the locations. The team did have a methodology for how they went about their analysis. I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but I just wanted to show you there was a method to the madness, if you will, for the recommendations that are being put forward. But it was typical things like, can we access it easily at different hours? Can we make it self-service? Is there no use conflict? In other words, if you did something in the nave, would you potentially have a conflict with somebody else who's using it? And you'd have to work around that. So those are one of the considerations. Security of the columbarium itself and church property. Safety of the individuals accessing the columbarium. Costs, obviously. The aesthetics. Aesthetics really came out very big in terms of the analysis and weighted very heavily. Architectural, the spiritual aspects, the material itself, whether you could obtain privacy or not, and then space utilization. Now, I'll say something about the space utilization. You'll see that we have discounted all of the indoor locations. And there were a variety of reasons for that, but space utilization was probably the most significant one because space is at a premium in our facilities here. And whereas we could put a columbarium in a variety of different locations, the team felt that utilization of that space was not the best. So those were discounted pretty early on. There were a number of other issues with the indoor locations. So the team, through this analysis, focused primarily on the outdoor locations, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But basically, with these grades, let me keep going. I'll highlight the remainder. In implementation, obviously, the relative ease, schedule associated with it, and any permit issues, and then the volumes. This also played into the analysis very heavily. Obviously, the number of niches in a given space, and then the expandability. Expandability being, if I establish a columbarium in one location, is that all that I can put there? It's just one set of columbarium, or can I expand it very easily in that particular location? So that was considered too. The grades associated with it, in other words, how did they grade it? It says indicated here. If we gave it a 1, it was unsat. If we gave it a 5, it was outstanding. So with that criteria in mind, we conducted an analysis, and I'm going to show you a sample. This is not the actual results, but I just wanted to show you this is the kind of thing that was established, and the team went, across with the criteria, and then down with the locations, and then did an analysis and came out with some values. This is only a sample, so don't get hung up on the numbers. But what the numbers told us is that there were 2 prime locations that the team conducted additional study on. Those top locations are the baptismal transept area and the bell tower portico. And so the baptismal transept area is, as I indicated here, right outside the baptismal font on this pad. And then the portico is underneath the bell tower. And we're going to look at both of these a little bit more closely. So immediately, in your own minds, I can hear the question, what happened to the garden? So we'll talk about the garden, and I'll give you an idea of what happened in the garden. There is trouble in the garden. Adam and Eve were not the only ones that had trouble in the garden. Gloria Day has trouble in the garden. And the trouble, it's not insurmountable, but I will tell you, it's just a very difficult road. I'm just giving you the Reader's Digest version. Establishing a columbarium in the garden has limitations and also financial issues associated with it. So, and I will tell you also, before I go into the details, that I was a very honest broker advocate for the garden. And I drove the team crazy. And Bill will probably attest to this, because I kept going back to the garden. Okay, tell me about the garden. Why can't we do it there? And finally, I guess last week, I said, all right, I need to see it. So we walked it off, and I looked at the issues. I walked it with Ann and Bill, and the garden is a problem. So what's the problem? The problem is, where it was originally intended, where Pastor Stowe had the vision to put it in this little alcove right here, there is a code requirement to establish a fire break between 2 facilities. And effectively, you have 2 facilities here. You have the atrium facility and you have the school facility. There's a 10-foot requirement. When you install the columbarium here, it reduces that 10 feet to about 9 feet. breaks the code. There's a way around that, and that would be to build up a firewall on the school side to allow for the 2-hour requirement. There's a 2-hour code requirement for burn separation. If you encroach on that to 9 feet, you have an issue. You do not have the 2-hour burn criteria anymore. So you could rebuild this wall to establish the 2-hour burn requirement. The cost is about $50,000 to $60,000, not even counting the cost of the columbarium. So there would be a cost there. There are drainage issues here, both in terms of actual water drainage and then weep holes in the concrete. Weep holes being as moisture accumulates in the inside of a structure, it needs to be able to get out, or else basically it's just going to rot away the inside. Well, you've probably never seen it, and I never had either, but there are little slices and cuts in the actual concrete, the actual stone structure. That's a weep hole. Those weep holes would obviously need to be re-established, and that is not a trivial task. You have to, there are internal aspects that you have to make sure drain to a particular weep hole. So there's issues there. So I drove a little crazy and I said, well, what about right across in this area here where the statue is at? Just to ask the question. And we looked at that. You could move the statue. There's a cost there. There are still drainage issues located here. But I think the biggest drawback to putting it in this location here is that it breaks, and this is not to scale, but basically the chapel is directly across from where the statue is at. It breaks the linkage, obviously, between the statue and the chapel when you look at directly out of the chapel. So there were a number of issues in the garden, and the garden was eliminated for that reason. That's simple. Okay, so let's look at the two that were viable. This is, and we have an artist rendition of this because this is kind of hard to visualize. It was for me, but this is right outside the baptismal transept area. The concept is an arched columbarium, like the one that you saw on your right-hand side there. And the first one that would be put in would be right here. So the first columbarium would be there. And that would be 80 niches. These other two locations initially would be seating, kind of bench seating. And what you would have is the columbarium, a prefab, would be installed here. And then outside of it would be what's called a concrete masonry unit, which is, if you look around the church, you see, the stonework. The columbarium would have the same stonework on the outside. So it would have the look, it would maintain the same look and feel, if you will, of Glory Day. And each of these bench areas would also have the concrete masonry unit on the outside with benches available on the inside. This is a gate, 2 gates located here. And the rationale behind having these here was twofold. One would be, the primary one is some level of noise dampening from the road noise. So this would be about a 6 foot, and when you sit in there, you're going to have a dampening of the sound. And the other one is just privacy. So there are 2 key reasons for that. And the third reason is expansion, because these are going to be built so that they could accept a new columbarium at a future date. So this particular plan allows a number of different things. Safety, meaning this is kind of walled off. Folks, can have privacy. It's secure because it's going to be in an open lighted area. You have expandability with these additional niches over here, and obviously, it's in terms of symbolism and in terms of connection to the Word. You've got directly over here the dove hovering right over these niches as you come up that walkway, and it creates the linkage between the death and the resurrection. Baptism, death, resurrection. So this was I initially had difficulty with this one, but until all of that was explained to me, and then I said, it's really a neat setup. And so what would that look like from the ground level? And I hope you can all see this, but that's effectively what it would look like as you're coming up the walkway. is if you have the initial columbarium right there, you have gates. This is about 6 foot high.
About 5 foot. Closer to 5.
Closer to 5? Okay. About 5 foot. And then obviously right over here are the benches, some seating, and future expansion.